The genre of horror has been around for many years and has spiked interest in many of its viewers. Peter Gutierrez stated that horror represents the shadow of culture, of media, and of media studies, the unintegrated part of the whole that draws power from our very reluctance to confront it and acknowledge it as, in fact, integral to the human psyche. How can people be so evil? What happens after death? How are we to cope with the inevitability of illness and mortality, as well as other existential fears such as loneliness, abandonment, or not being in control of oneself? These are the sorts of questions that horror with greater or lesser degrees of artfulness seeks to answer. Within recent years, we have seen a resurgence of classic slasher horror genre such as Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Whether it's in books, films, or video games, areas of science fiction, fantasy, and horror have become a valued interest for a specific community. Horror even finds itself inspired by general cultural context. As the horror renaissance reveals, the United States has been a frightening place to live for quite some time, stated Caitlin Benson-Ellett. Gaining inspiration from older PS1 style horror games such as Silent Hill and Resident Evil, the market for indie developed horror games has increased tremendously. Some of these indie developed titles create a new world for the player in an unrealistic environment featuring unsettling, ghoulish monsters that have nothing but evil intentions. Other indie titles fall into a realistic setting where the player is submerged into a situation that in fact could happen, opening up a new area of discomfort. These games have a way of using mediated fright in order to build suspense, scare the audience, and create negative emotions, while giving a satisfying ending to transfer the negative emotions to enjoyment. Due to an increase of indie developed horror games, the market has become flooded, leading to many titles being lost in the sea of releases. At this moment, the leading indie horror game platforms are both Steam and itch.io. itch.io alone has over 22,000 titles released under the horror tag. I've reached out to many different game studios in order to talk to them and get an understanding how they were able to market their game in a way that would stand out to the others. These studios range from teams of multiple people down to studios of solo developers. What are these studios doing to make sure their game makes a significant impact and sticks with the consumers rather than being buried in the new releases section? On June 18, 2020, an indie horror game titled The Swine was released to the public by a solo developer, Vincent Lade. Lade began developing video games in 2018 in Hong Kong, has released 4 games so far, and has a 5th release on the way. When asked what interested him in horror games, he expressed, "I started with playing old horror games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1. I had a fun time with my friends and always enjoyed horror over the other genres. Eventually, I wanted to start making my own after playing so many." Lade expressed that to him, horror is a mix of atmosphere, storytelling, and interesting characters, mostly the villain or monster. A good horror game can create an environment that pulls the player in with strong audio, pacing, and scares when needed. An article was written by Lorna Piatti-Farnell focusing on the film Dead Snow and spoke about the importance of the atmosphere of the film rather than just the subjects involved. Even though the fights with the zombies are obviously in the center of much of the plot, Dead Snow also dedicates a lot of attention to capturing long, lingering shots of the snowy landscape. The latter is almost invariably presented as eerily calm, its vastness providing an overbearing sense of stillness and dissolution. The Swine captures this type of atmosphere well, as it doesn't have to be dark and gloomy all of the time in order to make the player feel uneasy. Another atmosphere factor is cultural context. Kendall R. Phillips of the University of Texas Press wrote an article in 2018 where they talked about why classic films like Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are still so well known is because of cultural context. They say mystery thrillers may have resonated with audiences as they endured the country's first Red Scare, bolstered by public discourse after World War I that encouraged citizens to maintain a skeptical eye over even the most mundane contexts. The Swine is Vincent Lade's most popular game yet, with an 82% positive rating on Steam. He says that The Swine beat my expectations as it went more viral than I was expecting. All of his releases are built using the Unity engine and are released on Steam alone. When explaining his marketing strategies, Lade expressed that a lot of indie games get lost in new releases. Many developers don't create a community around their games, or the concept of their games are too generic to stand out on their own. He states that he wishes he would have written more articles and tweeted more to try to get more wish lists before launching, but that he pushes to get the store page up as early as possible to start generating wish lists. A wish list is what Steam uses to save games for a later date or to get notifications on releases or updates. Itch.io also uses the feature but calls them collections. Blade tries to tweet and write a small article whenever there is something new to show. I try to not neglect marketing during the run-up to releasing the game, as it's the busiest point in production. Blade then gives advice to the other indie developers. Spend more time promoting the game instead of solely working on it. Use avenues like game websites, social media, and devlogs to grow excitement around the game. Also, that no game is perfect. It can be tempting to spend weeks trying to find every single bug, but eventually the best thing to do is just release it and fix the little things as people find them. Vincent Lade's upcoming release is titled Witching Hour. A free demo is currently available on Steam with a full release coming soon. Around the same time in 2018 to 2019, Runway Games was formed and released their first game titled After Hours. When speaking to Patrick, who was one of the 5 developers that worked on the project, he stated that they gained interest in horror games because of playing them for so long. He also stated that in a horror game, aspects of a horror game are valued equally, this meaning relying on one tool such as Jumpscares will not create a good fleshed out horror game. Developers need to make sure that jump scares are viewed as not the main tool, but that it is just another tool in their tool belt alongside the atmosphere, lighting, and etc. Creating the atmosphere takes both visual and sound, sometimes sound over visual. When it comes to horror movies, the genre of monster horror actually utilized what was avoided in other films: off-screen sound with no prior visual establishment of the sound source. This method also transfers over to video games very well. Patrick expressed that prior to release, their Steam page was their main focus. They wanted to make sure that their Steam page was presented well so that they could start accumulating wish lists. This team also focused on meeting deadlines on time, using the closed beta for bug fixes, and avoiding using jump scares too much. Another strategy they used to get consumers' attention is making the game free to play. Patrick stated their targeted audience was anyone who enjoys horror games or scrolls through the Steam free-to-play section. He went on to say that the game did well over expectations, as we expected about 1,000 downloads and currently has about 55,000 downloads. When asked about patterns or pitfalls that he noticed in indie horror games, Patrick replied, "With the increase in indie horror games now, it seems that some developers push and quickly release a small horror game expecting to feed into the hype, but what happens is the game not being polished leads it to be overlooked and lost in the new releases." Patrick and Runway are happy with the result of After Hours and are currently working on their next title. Also in 2020, developer Anthony Madison created a studio with their significant other Gene Chandler called Apple Street Games. This 2-person studio released Time for Dinner, which was their first horror game release, in April of 2022. They were also fans of the original Silent Hill and Resident Evil games, which was a big reason for their interest to make a horror game. Anthony stated that a good horror game needs to have a good atmosphere. Art direction and sound design are key to that. The more oppressive the atmosphere, the better. If you can get the player feeling uneasy about just existing in your game world, then the other stuff like jump scares and unsettling set pieces can come in a lot easier. A study was done in 2019 by Christoph Klimt et al. Regarding music soundtracks having an effect on the player. They stated that if music is switched off and thus unavailable as a source of enjoyment, players may thus respond strategically by harvesting the beautiful 3D graphics or the great sound effects to maximize their sense of special presence and identification. Within the horror genre, This can be used as an atmospheric trick to make the player feel uneasy rather than comfort. I asked Anthony how they went about releasing their game Time for Dinner, and they replied, "We decided to try something a little different with the release time for this game. Most of our games we release around midnight local time, US Central Time Zone, but we put this one out a few hours earlier during what I had read are peak times for itch.io, and it seemed to pay off pretty well. In our first day alone, we managed more downloads than the rest of our games combined, and that initial success led it to being featured near the top of the Browse tab, which has snowballed into more and more downloads. At time of writing, we're closing in on 1,500 downloads, which far surpassed any expectations we had for the game. Though the game was just recently released, Anthony stated that their expectations were fairly low, but the game has already surpassed them. They also noted that a YouTuber with over 1 million subscribers played their game early on, and they believe that helped drive traffic to their game on itch.io. Anthony speaks about indie horror games and pitfalls they've noticed. I think a major pitfall for most indie developers is a lacking of marketing. We're guilty of this too. Most of our marketing is posts on Twitter that are basically only seen by other game developers. This project has taught me that getting your game into the hands of even moderately sized YouTubers can have a huge marketing boost. Reaching out to streamers and Let's Players is going to be a major part of our marketing the next time we're releasing a game, now that we've seen how effective it can be. We've seen it time and again with big streamers or Let's Players launching games to popularity, and it's kind of cool to see that happen to us, albeit on a much smaller scale. These first three studios, Vincent Lade, Runway Games, and Apple Street Games, have all given insight as to what approach they have taken when releasing their single-player indie horror games. Vincent Lade and Patrick from Runway Games both expressed their strategy of making sure their Steam page was polished and represented early enough to begin accumulating wishlist, while Apple Street Games focused on their total downloads and gaining collections. All three studios focused on making a good initial impact and getting customers to quote-unquote bookmark their games for a release date. Also, both Vincent Lade and Apple Street Games expressed their focus on marketing on social media and other avenues. Following the first three studios focusing on single-player indie horror games, we shift gears towards studios who have had success in the indie horror multiplayer area. In recent years, multiplayer games have been evolving, taking many forms and gaining many consumers' interests. First, I spoke with Wes Keltner from Gun Interactive about the release of Friday the 13th, the game. Gun Interactive was formed in 2010 in Lexington, Kentucky with just 2 people, but has since grown to 13. Wes said that he always enjoyed horror films when he was growing up, as his parents did not shield him too much from watching something spooky. Gun Interactive's first game was a military-based shooter, but Wes spoke about a recurring discussion he had with coworkers about a slasher-type video game. He goes on to say that Friday the 13th, the game, began being developed in Unreal Engine 3 for over half of production and then rolled into Unreal Engine 4 once it seemed stable enough. I first asked Wes what a horror game was to him.
There's what makes a horror game, and then like what makes a good horror game is, I guess, the the two conflicts I have with a question that's kind of like that, because you can give the sort of the definition of what makes a horror game, and yeah, it can be, because things like you mentioned, like a jump scare, where a jump scare is just like um, it's one tool in the tool belt, right?
Mhm.
It's it's just when you're making the recipe, that's one ingredient if you choose to use it, but you shouldn't have to rely on that. Like if you continuously put salt in your recipe because salt tastes good, at some point it doesn't taste good anymore and you've kind of ruined it. And that's usually what happens with jump scares in video games, and I would argue in film as well,
Mhm.
is it becomes a crutch uh, that developers and or filmmakers tend to lean on too heavily. It usually caters to a younger audience, um, the jump scare, where older audiences usually you only need to use like one or two, and the rest of it, um, you need to dip into to your bag of tricks, and not just rely on that. I'm a fan of psychological horror. I like that feeling of dread. I think it's important to. I love seeing both film and game that lets the audience or the player fill in the blank. There's like something that's you hear the spooky thing potentially, but you never see it. And you allow the audience's imagination come up with what do they think that spooky thing is in the dark. Because that's usually far scarier than what you could ever come up with
Hmm.
as someone who's trying to make a scary game or make uh, a horror film is let the audience's imagination do that. But yeah, it's funny because you think about when you're a game developer and you start tackling horror, like you look at things a bit more binary in like you got to create the features of the game, and then those features of the game are supported by gameplay mechanics, and so you start to break things down to almost like a science whenever you're going to approach making a horror game. And just some games rely on the jump scare, or some rely on just more feelings of discomfort or uneasiness. They set like atmospheric tone to make you feel a little on edge. um, I like when a game is using all of the tools, to kind of keep me guessing and keep me um, feeling a little bit uneasy. That I appreciate that type of horror.
I then wanted to know more of the background of the marketing strategies they took when releasing Friday the 13th.
Well, we knew from the rip, like, of course, it started out being a game called Summer Camp because it was just an homage to Friday 13th. It was a prototype. We just started building this thing, and we released images to IGN. And then, a month later, my phone rang, and it was Sean Cunningham, the director of the first Friday 13th movie and the owner of the rights. And he's like, "Hey, I see what you're doing. Do you want to turn Summer Camp into Friday the 13th? And like, I'll give you the license." And we're like, "Hell yeah!" So once we had the license, then we had an even clearer path on what that game was going to become, and then we took to Kickstarter, et cetera, et cetera. But what we knew about the game was it's going to be fun playing as Jason. Like we knew that from the rip. So because it's a power trip, right? And that's what a lot of games put the emphasis on. If you're playing an RPG, if you're playing whatever, right, is you get to be something in this game that you can't normally be in real life. And getting to become something as iconic as Jason, we just knew that was like that's a home run. We know. So we need to focus on counselor gameplay. We need to make that fun. So we spent a lot of time making the aspect of that fun, but we didn't want to bury the lead, right? Which is a journalism term, right? We knew when we were marketing the game and showing it, like you put Jason first and foremost, like always, and show the different ones that we've made, so that horror fans that love that series know that we're taking this seriously, and that we put authenticity above everything else. So like, it's the exact mask, it's the exact outfit he wore, that's the exact weapon he carried. Um, Tried to be as one to one to the film as we possibly could. But to people that just go, "Oh yeah, I know who Jason Voorhees is," they may not realize that there's 11 or 12 different versions of Jason, right? And they all visually look different. They possibly don't know that. So we want to make sure that to the super fans that they could look at the marketing materials that we were putting out and saying like, "Oh my gosh, like these guys are doing it right." But then make each beat that we do in marketing be about incredibly creative kills, because again we knew that's why people went to see those films throughout the 80s and 90s, was because all the kills that Jason does was very creative. So any marketing piece that we put out was very much focused on show the correct authentic Jason, and then show interesting kills and get right to it. Like don't hit them with a bunch of boring stuff, just right from the rip. uh, you know the term my creative director kept talking about was come out and punch him in the mouth. That was like what he would always like sort of jokingly say in terms of like the pace, the style, the fervor of our marketing was always very much like Jason, because Jason shows up and he's kind of bull in a china shop. He just comes in and just he's a brute, right? So that's how we did all of our marketing to assure that people understood we were doing this thing right. But we knew it was an uphill battle describing asymmetrical multiplayer because back then when we were marketing it, there weren't any games out that were like it, and so it was it was tough to explain what the game was. But most of our early marketing was just about Jason and kills, so that people could just watch these crazy kills happen and be like, I can't wait to play this. I don't even know what I'm looking at. I don't know who's doing what, but I want to play this. Um, and it wasn't until later that we could do more in-depth sort of developer walkthrough videos and explaining like, no, you play as a counselor or as Jason. Everybody you see are human beings, and you're running around Crystal Lake trying to survive. And people can usually put the pieces put the pieces together pretty quickly when you show them just that those few little mechanics and those few features of what the game is, then they get it.
Wes then shared us how he thought the game did compared to his expectations.
It far exceeded them, way far exceeded them. Um, like we took on outside of Kickstarter. We still needed more money. We got some investors to help us, and what I estimated for them, um, we did in 1 month what I told them the game would do in about 18 months.
Nice.
So they broke even in 3 days, and they expected like 6 months before they would break even. So it far exceeded everybody's expectations. I mean, we had friends, like we said, at Rooster Teeth and some other um, kind of high profile folks that played the game, and they were like, man, this is going to be a hit. This is going to be a hit. And we're like, yeah, I mean, it's cool to hear that, but it's you kind of take it with a grain of salt too, right? Because you're just like, yeah, you played it for 2 hours, and you're like on cloud nine right now because you've never played a game like it, and it is fun, but like to say a game is a hit, it's very difficult to continue that off of the initial wow, this game is new and fun. Like it's new and shiny, and once the shine wears off, like, do you still want to play it? And and what I didn't expect was the answer was yes. Like people wanted to continue playing it long after that initial phase had worn off. And even still today, we can't put any new content in it, but yet there's still a lot of people that play the game.
After talking for a while with Wes, my final question for him was how he viewed the relationship between horror games and video game streamers and content creators.
Um, I view that as a necessity. I think it's without it, it would be harder to market your game. I'm old, so I've been around since before Twitch TV was Justin TV and before Justin TV like even existed.
Mhm.
Like I remember going to the, you know, E3 2004, and like journalists were treated like rock stars. The same way that you may see Doc or Tim the Tatman or Summit or somebody show up at an event and everyone loses their mind. Back when I first started, that's how they treated the journalists, like the guys that wrote for EGM or One Up or any of those like things that are now dead. Right? How
Mhm.
how old are you?
25.
Okay. Do you remember EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly?
It sounds familiar, but I don't
Yeah. It was at one time the biggest video game magazine in the world.
really.
And yes, and the editors of that, like there'd be the guy that wrote for Xbox, the guy that wrote for Nintendo, the guy that wrote for whatever, and then there'd be like one editor in chief above all those people. Those 4 or 5 people, when they would show up at E3, it literally was like a rock star showed up. Like people were snapping pictures, like running up to them to want to get photos with them. And I don't mean just gamers. I mean game devs too would like run over and be like, "Oh my God, it's Dan Shu. I want to take a picture with you, Dan Shu, the editor in chief of EGM." Like it was wild. That's how it was treated. And then with Twitch, the invention of Twitch and YouTube, then like that just died. Content creators didn't go to journalism school. Content creators, aren't professionals in how to talk about a game. They just talk about what they feel and what they like. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the same thing as game journalism.
Hmm.
So it's a completely different field now that people who make games like myself, we have to understand that world, because before it was people like Dan Shu or Damian Lin or Joe Rubicki or all these, like, again, these are names that don't mean anything to you, but back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, like, those were the rock stars of game journalism. You want to be on their good side, and you hope they cover your game, and you sit down with them, and they get in, and they interview you, and it's a professional, courteous, respectful interview, and they know as much about making games as game developers do,
Right.
right? So it's a great conversation that occurs. You get into the meat and potatoes of, yeah, but what's the feature set? What's the gameplay mechanic? How does that support that feature? Why does the player want to come back? And you start getting these, like, incredible articles that get written about a game. That doesn't exist anymore. That's dead. And what exists now is, does the game stream well? Does Tim the Tap Man love playing it? There's still tried and true methods of how games get made, but now how you market it is totally different. The conversations you have are totally different. And don't I mean we still meet with, game journalists and people from, IGN, the, Kotaku, Game Informer. You still meet with those people and you still talk to them, but the conversations are nowhere near as in depth as they used to be.
Right.
I mean, over on YouTube, H2O Delirious, which is a content creator that, he he's 3 or 4 million views or whatever per video. He's got a lot of subscribers,
Hmm.
but his little icon or his little avatar or whatever that marks him is a little dude with a Jason mask on. Like, even before our game came out, he was just a big Jason fan. So when we announced, he was like, "Holy shit!" He, like, instantly followed us on Twitter, and he had millions of followers, and here I am, I had like none or whatever, and I was like, "Holy shit!" And he's like DMing me, be like, "Bro, I want to play your game," and I'm like, "Yeah." And that introduced us to, like, his group of YouTube people, and each one of them were getting basically the same amount of numbers that he was getting. And we were like, "Oh shit!" So we, like, got to know the guy, but the guy's, like, super down to earth and a cool dude. And so we sent him, keys to the game early and let them make all their content. And then the day the game came out, then bam, they dropped a whole bunch of videos on YouTube, and it was, one of their most successful videos they've ever dropped. Um, so it helped them, it helped us. It was like a great relationship. So we actually look for those, folks that are they have a track record of, oh, they've played, some horror games, and they understand how these games are played. So sadly, it's not the way that it used to be, and it's different and weird now. And it's, if you don't do it, if you don't work with streamers and communities, your game's going to fail from the beginning. Like, you have zero shot of launching a game unless you're an established studio like Activision, Ubisoft, whatever, where they can just be like, "We're making Division Part 3," and everyone's going to play it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that, you can do that, but studio like ours, where we're small and still trying to, like, make our way in the industry, you start with the communities. You start with streamers, and you go to them and talk to them about your game, and you try to get them hyped up about it.
In January of 2021, Straightback Games released the game Devour. This title follows the asymmetrical style, with a team of 4 facing off against a possessed cultist in order to prevent themselves from being dragged down to hell. I spoke with Joe Fender, who's the CEO of Straightback Games, about this title, and he gave some insight on his strategies for Devour. So far, the studio has released 2 games, The Watchers and Devour, with a team of 5 full-time developers and roughly 10 freelance workers. I asked Joe what a good horror game was to him, and he expressed the importance of scripting.
So I think that's a pretty tricky question, because we've struggled a lot with our games in the horror genre because they're multiplayer. And I think there's a very strict kind of line between horror when it comes to multiplayer versus single player. And to specifically answer your question, I think what makes a really good horror game is scripting. And so the best horror games, and the ones that made me the most scared, are usually the ones that have very well put together scripting. If you watch any good horror movie, the really scary ones, it's not an accident that they're scary. It's like years of writing and making sure that like things are timed to perfection, so that when there is like a a moment of anxiety or a moment of like jump scare or whatever, they've got you exactly where they need you mentally, so that that has the biggest impact. And so single player games, they can do that. They can put you on a rails and they can force you to go certain ways, and they can really make a good impact. And so I think scripting and timing is like the most important for a horror game. And that's obviously something that we've really struggled with Devour, is that we can't do that because it's multiplayer. We can't ever predict where anyone else is going to be at one time. So there are moments where you have like, kind of almost like Easter egg stuff happening when you're on your own, but nothing that's like really fully scripted.
Right.
And so we've kind of gone slightly the different way with the horror, which is somewhat like a cheaper way to do horror, but like just full on in your face intensity and jump scares. And it's more of like an attack on your senses, a little bit more than the more traditional kind of single player route of creating horror. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it also kind of brought up a thought in my head of like comparing the multiplayer to single player, where I kind of like, yeah, the single player is more scripted and everything, but I think that in a multiplayer horror game, the fact that it can't exactly be scripted the same kind of adds another layer of like unpredictability.
Yeah, you're totally right. I believe that Phasmophobia has proven that for sure. That once you've got enough good core mechanics and a good gameplay loop, and there's enough randomization in there, that every time you play, you can have a different experience.
Right.
And layers, right? Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the marketing side of things without kind of realizing. It was a very iterative process. We did hire someone to help. Obviously, you've spoken to him, Stefan. He couldn't make this call. He's kind of our PR/business consultant guy. He works with a lot of indie studios and he's got a lot of experience kind of promoting games. But at the end of the day, it was just about making that Steam page have impact. The approach we took was to get the Steam page up as soon as possible. A lot of indie developers try to wait until they've got loads of good content like trailers and screenshots and GIFs and all that stuff before putting a Steam store page up. But I think that's kind of like the opposite of what you should do. You should get a Steam store page up the moment that you've got a logo, and if you've got no screenshots, just fake them. I mentioned there's 2 games that we're bringing out at some point in future. They don't have screenshots really, so we've just put like images of like concept art and stuff like that on it. Really, it looks terrible really at the moment, but the reason why we put them on so early is so that we can start building the wish list early. And I'm sure you know about the importance of the wish list on Steam, but it really is like super important to the Steam algorithms to have a store page early up and have wish lists built up. So I think we launched Devour with like 10,000 wish lists or something like that, which sounds like a lot, but like that's the minimum you need to even be like probably included in the basic level of their algorithms such as like getting on that front page, new and trending section, and getting in people's recommendation lists and stuff like that. So our approach was just like focusing on that Steam store page and making sure that we had the correct tags, making sure that we really focused on that first sentence that you see when you read it, and the image, the capsule image that you see. I don't know if you remember when Devour first came out, it was pretty similar to as it is now, but it was like Anna's face and it just said Devour, burn her together.
Right.
And people saw that and they could tell, right, it's obviously it's a horror game. The name's really cool, I think. But the slogan kind of made it seem like it was a co-op game because of the word together. So we spent a lot of time on like making sure the wording was right and the imagery was right. And we just iterate. Like I must have edited that store page 20 odd times at the least. Honestly, like over the course of the year of the development, it was just constantly editing and editing. I think I made the first trailer because we didn't, we had no budget at the time, and that trailer took me like a month re-recording. It's not good. We've hired someone to do the trailer since. You can see the difference in quality, but if we hadn't spent that much time on the Steam store page, we wouldn't be where we are now for sure.
Already here, we see an overlap in strategy from single player to multiplayer because Joe mentions the importance of their Steam page in marketing their game. Joe was very helpful in this as he gave detail as to what about a Steam page they pinpointed and made sure it was polished and represented as it should be. Aside from the Steam page, I asked Joe what other strategies they took or red flags they tried to avoid.
Red flags. So I mean, the big one for us was not releasing at the same time as any other big games, and we actually spent a lot of time looking into that. But then at the last minute, somehow one had slipped through the cracks and ended up being another co-op horror game, which I still to this day don't see how we missed that. Yeah, that was for me the biggest red flag was like we want to release at a time where there's nothing else because we knew our game was very heavy on like streamers, like in terms of marketing it, right? Like we haven't paid a single dollar for marketing for Devour. Everything we've done has been organic through YouTube and Twitch, and that's about it. And obviously Steam, right? So for us, the most important thing was making sure that content creators would find it. Oh, I lied. We paid a little bit of money to Keymailer, which is a website for content creators to find game keys, right? So that was like $400 or something, and that gave us that little first kick that we needed on launch day, I think. But yeah, we just wanted to make sure that there was no other games coming out at the same time.
After Devour was released, Joe gave some insight as to how he believes the game did compared to the team's expectations.
Oh, it completely blew my expectations out of the water. I was going to be happy if I just made a little bit of pocket money on the side, right? So to be able to like quit my day job, and we have an office here in Edinburgh where we can go and like sit and work on games all day. It's amazing. It's like a dream come true. The best thing for me is actually just being able to work with my family. My sister and my brother, super talented, creative people, but both were actually working in nurseries. I guess you could call it a kindergarten, and they were earning like the lowest wage you can imagine. It's so badly paid in the UK kindergarten teaching, but they enjoyed it, right? But now they've both been able to like take a step back and like do something really creative that they enjoy for a living.
Right.
And so I'm super happy with how it's gone. Like, I didn't even dream it would be this successful. So I'm really chuffed. And it's funny because you look at our reviews and our game price, and it's good, but it's like there's a lot of other games out there who've got like 10 times our review score and like 5 times our price. There's some people making some serious money on Steam right now.
Right. Joe and I then talked a bit about the flood of games in the market at the moment and how indie horror games are becoming easier to make, causing the increase of production. Game engines like Unreal Engine and Unity are making it much simpler for people to create a simple game and release it to the public. I brought up a pattern I have been seeing in indie horror games, which is the overuse of jump scares.
Yeah, I think the entry bar for making games now is quite low with the help of things like Unity and Unreal. They've done great jobs, but it kind of means anyone can make a horror game now if they really wanted to. So there's a lot of trash coming out, and I say trash, it's not that polished. And so yeah, you say like jump scare heavy, you're totally right. Like we're probably about the loudest jump scare on the Steam store right now. And before us, there were obviously other games that had done them, and I think a lot of the games had done them really badly and hadn't really paid attention to like what makes a jump scare actually scary. The trick is just to blow people's eardrums, by the way. just just make it unbelievably loud with no volume slider. You'll piss off 10% of people, but the rest of the people enjoy the heart attack. But then yeah, like people seem to focus on the wrong things when they're making horror, and they need to understand what type of horror they're trying to make. So we knew early on, right, we're making a game where the intensity will build over time. So everything revolves around that increasing number of burns. Every map is 0 to 10 out of 10. And every time you do something, there's a very large number of things increase, probably a lot of things you wouldn't realize, from obviously the speed of the AI to things like if you look up at the sky, the color of the sky changes slowly and becomes redder over the course of the game. And we wanted to put everything into building that intensity, so that when you do get a jump scare, it's really intense. And that's almost like the crescendo of the intensity is that jump scare. But a lot of horror games kind of just don't seem to figure out exactly what they're trying to do, and so they do a bit of everything, and none of it seems to sit that well. If you're a multiplayer game, like I said, you got to stop relying on trying to script things, because it will never go well, and do more what like Phasmophobia did, and create an environment and an ambiance that creates fear and tension in a different way.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of people just, they don't know what they were trying to sell. It's not just games. Like that's just like a general thing with marketing. Like if you really need to know what you're trying to sell. And I'm sure if you do end up working like digital marketing for someone, you'll spend half your time asking questions to people so that they can figure out what the hell their business model actually is before they can even market the thing.
One thing from my interview with Joe that stuck out the most, aside from the importance of the game's Steam page, is the importance of knowing what you're marketing. Understanding what exactly the intention is and what you're trying to sell is very important when it comes to video games and anything else on the market.
I mean, I guess that in itself is an answer. Like I'm an engineer, and I've always been an engineer in my career in terms of like programming. I've never done any marketing before, right? So like teaching myself what the hell marketing was really important. Like looking up on YouTube loads of presentations about digital marketing of indie games from expos like GDC, a few good talks. I guess that more recently, a lot of the horror game streamers are actually more social than the other ones. Like because of this kind of rise in multiplayer horror, namely like Pacify, Phasmophobia, Dead by Daylight, Devour. What have I missed? There's probably others, but this kind of rise in those games has really helped a lot of those streamers to like build like a social group. I don't watch a ton of streamers anymore, so I don't really know what other streamers are doing, but it seems like a lot of them are doing chatting
Yeah.
or they're playing like the latest scuffed indie games that they can find for their people watching them. I know there's tons of like Fortnite streamers and stuff, but the things that actually seem to get the views these days are more like people they mark themselves as just chatting, and then they'll just load up whatever game they can find on Steam that's scuffed and just play that.
For our last section, I sat down and spoke with Sam G, the community manager, and Chris Mayer, the CEO from Hellbent Games. Hellbent Games was formed in Burnaby, British Columbia in 2006 with a team of just 3 people. The team has grown to around 50 people now, with 8 of their own releases as well as 15 other projects they help develop. I spoke with Sam and Chris about 2 games they have developed. The first game, titled Wick, is a single-player horror game where the player is wandering in the woods alone. The second game is titled VHS. VHS is an asymmetrical multiplayer game that is in beta right now, working its way to a full release. When speaking to Sam and Chris, I first asked them what exactly a horror game was to them.
So, I mean, when I grew up, horror games didn't really exist, but they started forming in the PlayStation 1 was the best version of horror games, I think, where we really got scary games. And we got to see things where you'd like the Japanese release of games like Resident Evil and all those sort of games, or Silent Hill, or
Silent Hill, yeah.
yeah,
Silent Hill was
those
very
games. Silent Hill 2 is still one of my favorite experiences of all time. In fact, I've gone back and played it multiple times because it's just so unique, and it's got some pieces that really scratch an itch for me about like really fun, scary horror, really believable setting, and really fun. Like, I mean, it's a ridiculous setting, but it's a believable foggy town sort of setting, right? So, but there's so many of those types of experiences that were a great. I mean, to me, it's not it's being surprised. That's the biggest part of it to me. If I can predict what's going to happen, it's never scary. In fact, I love surprises that play off of the fact that you think you've got what you've predicted, right? That's the best thing in a
Mm.
movie, when the scare happens and you know it's going to happen, but then there's a second scare you're not expecting. Those are the fun moments, and that works really well in the game. I used to play a game called Clive Barker's Undying.
Mm.
Not many people probably played it, but it had some really fantastic moments where I was like, legitimately, my skin was just creeping, and I really loved playing that because it was like it recreated finally what the horror movies were for me, but I was the person in the driver's seat. And when we made Wick, we tried to figure out what was the best way to tell a horror story to our fans, and we really didn't want to do something on a linear path. So our game was a very open world. You decide where you want to go, you decide what you want to do, and the world responds to you, and the scare comes to you. And I think that really worked for us in a lot of ways.
I then asked Sam and Chris what they felt about jump scares and if they are still a primary tool to use in a horror game.
I think, to me, jump scares are good. Suspense is obviously a key section. Like, you need to feel unease all the time, not know what's going to happen.
That's
That's
usually when
yeah.
I feel the most scared, is when it's
Mhm.
that like uneasy, like nothing's jumping out at you, but like something is like hiding in the shadows, or
Yeah.
that something's gonna come out of nowhere kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing, is you can play with that tension and hold it off and deliver at different points, and it's really great. I mean, story is obviously a huge part of it, narrative and story, and we, for Wick specifically, we wrote a big story, and we only delivered a very small portion of that to the game.
Mhm.
And then the fans actually were able to connect the dots, and that was very rewarding for us as developers, to see them figure out how things worked and try to piece together a puzzle there. And I think that's part of a good movie, that you don't go into a movie at the beginning and go, oh, I get what's happening, and it plays out exactly as you're expecting. There's twists, there's turns, but you sort of are putting together, there's more than just a surface story. This guy didn't just decide to kill today. He's got a backstory, and he's got a history, and he's got connections to different things, and you see those things come out. And I think that's really important in any of those games, like really deep story that supports the horror. It's a reason for things to exist, right?
Upon releasing Wick and the beta for VHS, I asked Sam and Chris what strategies they took in order to make sure the game was seen by as many eyes as possible.
With Wick, we really didn't know much about anything on strategies at the time. We released the game on Steam. We did trailers for the game. We didn't really do any other advertising. We did contact a lot of streamers, and a lot of streamers contacted us after they found out about it. So a lot of it was word of mouth. Um, like a couple bigger streamers played it, like Markiplier and things like that, and that really helped bring in every streamer in the world who wanted to play it after that. You also get a lot of people who just want free keys. So I'm a streamer, I want keys. So you get a lot of that. But we really didn't have an avenue to talk directly to fans back then. We didn't have a Discord. We didn't really use the Steam forums too much. We used them a bit. Some email came to us and things like that, but it was more we were watching YouTubers, and YouTubers were connecting to the fans, and we had a weird distance from the fans. And we've really changed that with VHS, and Sam's the leader of that front on our side. So
Yeah. And one of the biggest things that I really like about what we're doing, or what I liked about when I joined, is that there is direct direct contact with the fans. So we're very much community driven. We're very much for our community. We get a lot of really great feedback from them, which in the long run helps us to create the best player experience possible. So yeah, that's kind of what we do. Is we check in with, we have mods, and they like write down questions, or they write down feedback, and they pass it along, and that's stuff that we bring to the team. So yeah, a lot of it is community related for sure.
yeah, I think that direct connection, because we're not a published game, we're publishing ourselves, is possible. With a lot of publishers, you are at arm's length, and that's sort of the way we were used to working when we worked on Lego games and other titles in the past. Is the publisher handles all the front facing connection to anything. They don't really talk to the fans, but they give material to the fans. In our game, it's much different. We directly engage with fans. We know a lot of them. They know a lot of us. A lot of our mods came from our fan group. A lot of our some of our devs came from fan group. So it's a really interesting direct connection that really has helped make the game. I mean, when we started making this game and what I envisioned it being, it's close to what it is now, but what the game is now because of the team is quite dramatically different. Everyone brings so much to the game and made it something so much more powerful and magical. And I think the fans are the other part of that. They bring they respond to things, they ask for things, we watch them playing certain ways and we reinforce things different ways. So I think that direct connection and their ability to know that we play the game and play with them has been really key for the early success we've had so far.
A key point I got from this answer from both Sam and Chris is that though all the workers inside of a game dev studio are very important, the community is equally, if not more important. The direct interaction with the fans help create a game that they are truly interested in playing. Chris gave a lot of information about game structure, especially for multiplayer games, that help make sure that players come and stay. This can also tie into intended audience, as younger audiences prefer different types of games than an older audience. Terrifying stories intended for the youngest audiences, especially audio-visual stories, are often ghostly rather than horrific, and they tend to sugarcoat certain situations or treat some of their more intense moments comedically.
I mean, Wick was a very short project. It was the first version of Wick, the first part before the No Way Out expansion was made in like 6 months with 5 people. It's a tiny project for us. And then we added more people when we added the expansion and stuff into that. So that one really was made in seclusion and then just released. No one knew it existed before it was released. We didn't do anything. So there was that one. We just wanted to make sure we had a lot of fun playing it. We played it a lot, made sure we didn't have any bugs. Tried to make it we tried to not supersede the amount of time and budget and things with that. We really tried to stay tight on it and get it done and get it on Steam and try all those things out. With VHS, we really wanted to make sure we had enough content to support the game. And that's not just cosmetics. That's progression systems, the journey systems, things. So we knew the first thing we did was build the gameplay loop. And we built that without any art at all. And we got it to a point where we had a lot of fun playing basically a version of freeze tag. And then we added a weapon. The first weapon we added was a cross. We used to just play with crosses. It was like, we called it the God Squad, running around and shooting people with crosses. It was very fun. It was kind of weirdly like a Ghostbusters game at that point. Like you ran around with these crosses and you'd stop the monster, and it felt like you were like trapping them in a ghost trap. And we had no art at all. All our players were mannequins running around. All the monster was a mannequin. He was just scaled up a little bigger and colored red. So it was very simple.
Danger.
Yeah, exactly. It was really fun though, and that's what we realized is we didn't need to do any art with the Unreal Engine. We had mannequins, we had animations. We didn't even have an animator. Our rigging, our artist took weapon shooting animations and took away the gun and made his arm go like this, and that was like healing somebody and stuff. They were terrible animations, but it all worked. And we figured all of our proof of concepts were done with no art. We really did it very simple. I built a level in like BSP blocks. There was no textures, there's no anything. There was the high school level, and we built the werewolf as our first monster. Those were all done without any artwork. So fun was really the driving factor. Is it fun? Do we have fun? Where's the sticky points where it's not fun? And we really made sure we nailed that before we went forward with anything, any more art and things like that. So that was a key understanding early on, is we need to find the fun first and then put the art in. I see so many people make games where they put all this pretty art in and hope the fun will show up. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's a lot of wasted time. Or the fun materializes later and you're like, oh, that's going to change everything we did already, so we have to throw a bunch of stuff away. We try not to do that. We have made some things we had to redo, obviously some levels we had to redo, and some characters we had to, like our wart character we did twice because it just didn't work the first time, and the hotel level needed some reworks and things. But we have built-in processes now, so we don't have that problem. But before we released the game, we really wanted to make sure we had something more to do than just play the game. So if you go in and play the game and have a lot of fun, that's great. And people will treat that like a party game. They'll play it with their friends, have a good time, and then they'll come back to it whenever. But if you give them something more to do, like you give them stories, multiplayer games with stories were never really existing before, like the last 10 years. Now multiplayer games have a lot of lore in them, a lot of depth. And we made sure we had a depth deep story for each of the characters and each of the monsters. We had origin maps that tied to each of the monsters. We have a progression system you can go through for all the monsters and all the teens, where you can unlock perks, you can unlock more abilities, you can unlock cosmetics. We made sure that there was a store that had a bunch of cosmetics that supported everything. We made sure that as you play the game, you earn points. Everything, all those systems are interconnected, so you want to play the game a lot more. You want to play the game every day. You want to get better at your character. You want to try the new things out. And without those pieces, a lot of people look at asymmetrical games in the last 5 years and say, why did they fail? Oh, because of this, this, or this. To me, it's always because they never thought about progression. They never thought about how to make that game make the gameplay loop can be great, but if you have nothing else to do, it's going to be a one and done thing where you play for a while and, well, we'll come back to that whenever.
Chris, Sam, and the rest of the team have definitely done a lot of homework structuring VHS in a way that will have a lasting impression on the industry. Though VHS is still in development, I wanted to ask prior to the beta release what red flags they avoided or attempted to avoid, and this is what they said.
Sam, you're going to have to talk. I've talked too much.
Yep, no, that's totally fair. So one of the main things that we wanted to make sure of is that balance was solid before releasing. Asymmetrical games in general tend to be one of the hardest to have like a good balanced game. So that was one of the things that we really wanted to focus on. Security was another top priority. I mean, VHS has been down for maintenance. We've been really hammering away at security and making sure that it's a secure game where it can continue to thrive in a live ops environment. And one of the most important things as well is not only engaging with the community, but listening to what the community has to say. It's one thing to be able to go in and have these conversations with the community, but if major problems or major quality of life updates aren't done or aren't taken care of, then it's continuing to kind of break that trust within the community. Whereas if you take the feedback from the community, present it to the team and say, listen, like, here is what the community is saying, these are some of the suggestions, how are we going to be able to make those changes and retain these players. So yeah, that's one of the big ones is maintaining that trust with the community. We didn't want to break that. We don't want to promise things that we can't deliver. We don't want to so
Something that stuck out to me about this answer compared to answers I received from other studios is Sam's reply stating that they didn't want to promise anything they didn't know that they could deliver. I think that before even knowing what you're selling, you have to know if you can sell what you're preaching. I could say right now that I am solo developing a AAA title that's going to change the course of how games are made and try to market that, but I would be lying because I'm not a game developer, let alone one powerful enough to solo develop a AAA title. I think this was a great red flag to avoid, especially from a marketing standpoint, because it would lead to massive amounts of negative reviews. I went on and asked for Sam and Chris's view on how both games have been doing compared to their expectations.
Wick did really surprisingly well. I mean, the budget was small and development time was small, but it took a while to pay itself off. But we're on Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam. And I mean, I still get good sized checks every month from that game. I'm surprised by how many people still play it. We released it on Steam, then we released it on PlayStation, and we did a lot of like our own little internal videos and marketing for that. And then we're so tired at the point where we got to Xbox, we just put it on there. It actually does amazingly well on there because there's just not a lot of that type of horror experience on there. With this game though, I think it's exceeded my expectations in so many ways. Like I always knew we could make a fun game, but the collaboration of the entire team and their feedback working together to build something, we really have an ability to react to fun. So if someone goes, like, for example, I don't know if you played VHS or watched VHS or anything like that, but if you die in the game, you can be resurrected by a Book of the Dead. That was my idea because I liked it. Evil Dead has the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. I thought that was fun, a one chance shot to come back to life. And then I was like, well, what if we made you a zombie when you come back to life? That sounded fun. We literally built that in one day. I went to our lead character artist and said, could we make someone into a zombie? He painted it right up. I went to our lead animator and said, could you? And he had animations done in like a couple hours. It was crazy how fast we had it in the game. And the fact that we're able to react to fun moments, and we can't always do that, but I mean, the fact that we're able to do that a lot, or we discover things while we're building our character generator that makes the game something else possible. But that exceeds my expectations all the time, because I never expected we could have a character creation system that could do any of the stuff we could do. I thought we would have set costumes originally. I didn't think it would be, because other games usually do like either a couple pieces change or they're set costumes. We do everything. Like, it's crazy how much we do for a small team. And I think the fact that like my vision of horror is limited to like the shelf of movies I watched when I was a kid, but everyone else here comes with all these other ideas from other movies, and everything means something more to them than it does to someone else. They all have their own passions they bring to it. Someone might love Star Wars, someone might love like history movies, like who knows, right? But they bring elements of that to the game, and it's just been amazing seeing. I mean, Sam's only been here for a few months, and she's like, can we do this, can we do this, can we do this a lot? And we've done a lot of those things already, which is really great. So it's fun not being limited by like a big to give you an example, if you're working on a big AAA title, those ideas are developed and designed very tightly for a while, and then it's taken out to the game and they make the game for a couple of years with a big team. There's not a lot changing the direction of that ship in that time. Our game, we're able to influence that on a much smaller level because we are players and fans and love our game. We're not making a single player game that's so like linear based, and if we change something it'll totally wreck the whole story. We're able to make a lot of decisions around what is really fun and what will support the longevity of the game, which is, I think, really great. So that exceeded all of my expectations. I never thought we would have this. I never thought we'd have the ability for this. I worked on games like Counter-Strike before, and we had a bit of that, but this is, once again, that theme was very tight. Our theme being so wide open has really made me go, wow. And there was a time in our game where I was like, I don't want costume abominations. I don't want people to dress with ridiculous looking costumes. And now you can really dress ridiculous in our game. And I realized I was trying to put too much of my own self into the game, where the way I want to play, and other people, their fun comes in a completely different way. And does it wreck the game for me if I see someone running around in like one of our artists would, the way he would dress in the game? No, it doesn't at all. In fact, I know it's him, so that's great. So my bigger fear was actually that everyone would jump in with the same costume and we would never be able to tell who was who.
Right.
It's so much more fun now that everyone can personalize and do weird things. Anyway, Sam, I know what you feel, but to me, my expectations were blown away on this title for where I thought we'd be and where we are. I think it's much better than I ever imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the chance to play test VHS a couple of years ago, and even the difference between then and now is just like it's. I opened the game for the first time a couple months ago since I got to play test it, and I'm like, wow! Like I was blown away. Like, the characters had so much personality, and like the game itself was fun. There was a lot of cosmetics, and like the community reaction to it has just been absolutely wonderful. Even when I have to deliver news, they're all very supportive and like understanding, and we have a really good fan base that has the game has just been so well received. That yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Chris then gave some insight into some more of their marketing strategies and touches on the importance of the community, content creators, and streamers.
Yeah, for this game, we've done zero traditional marketing. We haven't paid anyone for anything. We got a couple streamers in. Our first week after we announced it, I think we had 10 or 15 people a day signing up for a beta, and we were like, that's fine. We'll get a couple thousand people and do a beta. And then all of a sudden, one streamer picked up on us and shared it to everyone in the world. And all of a sudden, we were getting hundreds of people a day. And the number of people that showed up has blown my mind. Like, we went from a no Discord channel to like almost 50,000 people in a Discord channel that we manage now. Like that's a lot over a very short period of time. Because I know people keep saying on our forums and stuff like that, oh, I've been following this game for so long. Well, it's only August we announced the game, so they haven't been following it that long. It's half a year right now we're into it. So I mean, but it's the people have shown up, the number of people signed up for Steam wish lists, the number of people who done art. We're doing an art contest right now, and the amazing cosplay and the amazing art, the amazing fan feedback, that's blown my mind, because we haven't done any advertising. So without that, we honestly hoped for 5,000 people, and we've got hundreds of thousands signed up for our stuff, and that's been remarkable to me. And I know that'll get bigger when we actually get onto Steam and do more things like that. So.
Even in the last 2 months, there's been like 5,000 people who, like 5,000 more people who have followed the Twitter alone, and that's not taking into account the amount of people that have come to the
When our game's not
Discord.
even
And
running, yeah.
yeah,
When releasing a game, especially an indie game, there's a lot of overlap where developers will reuse the same concept or tool from one game to another. As it was brought up before, the overuse of jump scares in horror games is a big pattern or pitfall, but within the multiplayer section of horror games, Chris gives some insight as to what he has seen.
Yeah, I talked about some of this already. I talked about the lack of content and being
Mm-hmm.
prepared for like iterating for when like we don't know what's going to sell in our store. We know some things are going to sell in our store, but maybe people will only want to buy socks. Maybe they'll only want to buy costumes. Maybe so we're going to have enough content to support doing that. So a lot of people don't think of that. They don't have enough content or not able to make enough to be reflective of what the audience wants, or reactive to what the audience wants. I mean, I talked more about like what I think makes like the progression in those journey systems make things successful in a game, and other games companies don't have that necessarily. But I mean, for our game, we know what we think is going to make it successful. We know that trusting our instincts has been really good. I think a lot of people play it safe or they follow too much of the mold of something else. We're trying to really make sure we embrace where we find the fun, and I think that's it's hard to do because it's scary. You're going down a path no one's ever done before, and it feels safer to go on a path that someone's already been on, but that path someone's already been on is not very interesting to people. So we're really trying to find a way to be brave enough to go out there and like expose ourselves to the community and say what can we do here to make this great. That's hard to do, it's risky to do, but it's also rewarding to do. So but yeah, other indie games. I mean, there's so many indie games. It's hard to say. Like games are sometimes you can have 2 or 3 games that are very similar that are very successful, and sometimes it's like always the new thing that's successful. It's really hard to be predictive. It's really hard for someone to sit down in a room and say, "I've looked at games and open world games where you can craft things and you can fight monsters and you can do that will be successful because Dark Souls and Minecraft and they go through Rust and all these other games. Those are all successful. So therefore, if we made a game that was a compilation of those games, it would be successful." I don't think that works. Never seen that work. I've seen so many publishers try it and I've never seen it work. Really, if this game didn't speak to our team and we weren't making a game that we loved, I wouldn't feel confident putting it out there. That's what the biggest test for me is. Do we love playing it? What's our gripes about the game? What's the community when they started playing? What are they seeing? Like there's people who want better tutorials. There's people that want specific monsters. There's people that want all types of things. And we just have to listen to all that and sort of filter through it and say, what is the best thing we can do for the game at this moment?
Before wrapping things up with Sam and Chris, I wanted to see if they had anything else to add about the connection between content creators and indie horror games.
So content creators and streamers are super important to us. I know we got tagged with, we were giving keys only to content creators. We actually weren't. We were randomly giving out keys. We did give some keys directly to content creators because, I mean, we needed to we're building a feature set in our game to support content creators so they can hide their name, they can stream without being stream sniped, they can, a lot of people, we didn't know if like, because our game has talking in it built into the game, we didn't know if that would work for streams. So they have the ability to mute that or change that. But more than that, those people, like those streamers are the gateway for our game to be seen by everyone in the world. We're not using marketing. We're not using any of those things. So we really wanted to get in early with that group and build that group the way we hoped it would be. And part of that is being as positive as possible. We really don't want to have a negative community. I know it's hard to control your community once we're in the wide open, but we're trying to build a foundation of positivity. So we really sought out streamers we thought had a positive tone, a positive voice, that maybe not be the biggest streamers in the world. Like we consciously moved away from a lot of the bigger streamers in the world. We're trying to find streamers who are going to be the best for the growth of our game and the best for the growth of their streaming. We'd love to have people grow with the game rather than necessarily be like a big streamer coming in. As much as we love eyeballs on the game, we actually would rather have quality, positive world. Like, so one of the streamers we have is Granny. I don't know if you're familiar with Granny. She has the white hair. She dresses up as a old lady, old Scottish lady, and it stays in character the whole time. It's a pretty amazing thing. It's a lot of energy. Oh my God, it's a lot of work. But her message and the way she talks is just so positive and so powerful. Like we really wanted to, we actually gave her cosmetics in the game because we really wanted her to be part of our community. So that to me, like that's a, I know this isn't really answering your question, like we're between horror necessarily and stream content, but just streamers in general, they are the lifeblood in a lot of ways of what our game is. And I think if you don't manage that, you can end up with a situation where there's a whole lot of negative content being put out there. And I think we've done an okay job so far, and we're going to try to push as hard as we can for it to keep that going in a positive way. Sam, I
And
know
that
you have something to say. So
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it also kind of opens the door for, even more feedback because we can get feedback directly from our community, but, maintaining the relationship with these content creators and their community, they have an ear to the ground to, for things that might be important feedback for us. So yeah, keeping that relationship, and building up their stream and supporting them the same way they kind of support us. Like there's a good, it's a really important relationship to maintain, and something that we want to continue doing going forward. We have
mhm.
an ambassador program in the works. So not only will, the content creators be promoting us, but that's something that, we kind of want to give back as well. We want to be promoting them. So
As stated before, the community of a game is very important in the production and longevity of the project. Overall, we've come across a lot of overlapping trends and strategies when it comes to marketing an indie horror game, whether it's multiplayer or single player. We've seen the importance of making sure the Steam page or itch.io page is posted early and polished in order to gather wishlists, writing posts and articles about the game in more places than typical social media platforms, interacting with the community and taking feedback whether it's presented in a positive or negative way, and using it to structure the game to retain as many players as possible. Interacting with content creators and streamers, as Hellbent and other developers have said, content creators can be the gateway for games to be seen. And the last thing, know what you can sell to then know what you will sell. Overpromising can be detrimental to a game, whether it's first sight or for the longevity of the game. The way I see it is like this. If your grandma tells you that she's going to make a batch of homemade cookies, you're going to be excited about the homemade cookies. But when she brings the platter out and it's actually steamed broccoli, you're going to be a little upset. You might still eat the broccoli depending on the person, but you had an appetite ready for those cookies, so you were definitely let down. So next time she says that she can make a batch of cookies, are you going to trust her? Or are you going to think that it's going to be broccoli again?